Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to the No Trade Clause podcast. I am your host, Aaron Washington. Co-host Avi Tiagi is back with us this week. It's been a little bit. I think it's been maybe a week and a half since we recorded, but now that the conference finals have ended and the NBA finals are on the horizon, we wanted to jump back on with you guys and just give a little bit of a breakdown, a little bit of a preview on what's to come here in the finale of the NBA season. But I want to go ahead and welcome in our guest for this afternoon. It's going to be Shane Young from Forbes Sports. And Shane, I'm really glad to have you on this episode. Avi and I are really glad to have you, mainly in part due to the fact that you've covered the Celtics so extensively this season, and you've been on top of their incredible run and what they've done so far leading into the finals. So I figured it'd be a good time to bring you on, and you can kind of set the record straight as far as what this team has done so far and what we should expect from them. So hope everything is going well in your world, man, and I'm glad to be back with you on this podcast.
Appreciate it, man. Feels like I'm a guest 2 or 3 times a year. I always enjoy it. We always have some fun conversations, so ready for it.
Awesome, man. We're glad to hear that. So, this is going to be a really fun episode, guys. We're going to keep it real simple, one series, NBA Finals, and we're all going to give some overall thoughts and maybe get into some predictions here towards the end. But Shane and Avi, I wanted to go ahead and start off this podcast by talking about how things have changed here and progressed since these two teams met earlier in the season. Now, they met 2 times, but that second time back on March 1st is what I want to key in on because that was post-trade deadline. That was after the Mavs acquired P.J. Washington. They acquired Daniel Gafford. So that's when the team completely changed from where they were before with Grant Williams, with Seth Curry. That's where their defense took off, and that's a big part of what has allowed them to make this deep run here into the NBA Finals. So Avi and I watched that previous matchup between the two teams, and I think one of our big takeaways from that game was the fact that the Mavs rotation, even post-deadline, has changed a lot. If you go back in that game and you look at how many minutes these guys were playing, Gafford played less than 10 minutes. Derrick Jones Jr. played less than 10 minutes. Josh Green was over 20 minutes. He was a starter in that game. He was the primary defender on Jason Tatum. That's not going to happen in this series. That's out the window. I really noticed how Josh Green just got picked on in that game. Like, he's 6'4", 6'5". He's tough. He fights hard, but he's no match for the incredible offensive talents that the Celtics have on their side. So that's going to change completely. Derrick Jones Jr. is going to step into that role now, starting, playing over 30 minutes. His athleticism, his activity off ball, his cutting is a huge asset to Dallas. So that's going to be radically different. So I wanted to first highlight that, just the fact that, yes, the Mavs lost that game pretty badly. They lost by, I want to say, 28 points in that game. But despite the fact that Dallas lineup wasn't yet optimized, they still held their own for a majority of that game. They didn't completely get blown off the floor until the fourth quarter. And the Celtics had way more three-pointers than the Mavericks did in that game. I mean, the Mavs only had 9 threes. The Celtics had over 20 threes, I believe 21 threes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Avi. But just incredible three-point shooting from the Celtics. Now, that's something that I'm sure is going to continue. The Celtics have been a prolific three-point shooting team all season long. And if you go and look at their accuracy this season so far from three-point range, I mean, they've been right around that 40% mark for the majority of the season, and even higher if you go look at the playoff picture. So that's something that's going to carry over. That spacing is going to be incredible here. For Dallas, the rotations are different. Their defense is more sturdy, more solid than it was before. So in my mind, this is going to be a very competitive series. It's going to be very close. It's going to be tightly contested both ways. And I think it's going to really reflect how both these teams are great on both ends. Both of these teams are very balanced. So with that out of the way, with that being addressed, Shane, I wanted to go ahead and hand this over to you, hand the mic over to you, so to speak, and let you kind of break this down from the Celtics perspective. Because going into the finals here, they've had 3 opponents, and they've all been missing essentially their best player at some point or another, with Miami missing Jimmy, with Cleveland missing Donovan Mitchell for 2 games, also Jared Allen, and then Indiana missing Halliburton for those last 2 games as well. But despite that, Boston's been incredible. You look at their numbers, their rating numbers are really solid. They've been top 3 in both offense and defensive rating all the way through. So, I mean, this is a very solid team, regardless of who they played. But Shane, go ahead and break it down for us, man. Like, what should we be aware of with the Celtics team, and why are they so formidable going into the series, despite the fact that they've had maybe not the most challenging path to the finals on paper?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, of course, there's nothing wrong with pointing out you played 3 injured teams and you didn't really get the best of any opponent in those matchups, especially later on in the series, right? Because Miami was decimated towards the end there, and then obviously Cleveland with Donovan out. So, it is what it is. But I think I said this before, and I think it still rings true. Like, all these teams, New York, Milwaukee, Philly, any of those East teams could have had that same trajectory. They could have had that same route if they had won 64 basketball games and got the 1 seed. So, I look, and I know you'd probably know this about me just from us talking over the years, but like, I look at the totality of the year. Like, you don't win 76 games in 7, 8 months, and you're just like, no competition for the West. And I think that is something that has stuck out to me, is that a lot of people are just seemingly ignoring the fact that Boston was 23-7 against West teams by an average of 14 and a half points a game in the regular season. I mean, does that translate to a dominant team over the course of a full schedule instead of just 30 games? I don't know, but I do know that that's a great winning percentage. It's over a 65 win pace, I believe, against West competition, including Dallas, who they beat twice. So for me, I always throw it out the window when people are talking about paths to the finals. And I think the biggest component of that, the biggest reason why I don't think it matters at all, how many times, and I'm genuinely curious, like, how many times have we ever thought back and said, man, whose path was really bad? The 2017 Cavs, or man, those 2004 Pistons just didn't have to get through that much competition, or the '08 Celtics. Man, they really struggled with Atlanta on that first round. Nobody cares. Not a single person cares if you win the championship. And I think the '08 Celtics are a strong comparison for this team, because they were top 10 in offense, they were number 1 defense by a wide margin, and
Mm-hmm.
Boston was the best East defense by a wide margin. So, and it took the Celtics 7 games in 2008 in the first round, 7 games in the second round, and they end up breezing through the Lakers like somewhat easily because Andrew Bynum was hurt, I believe. So it's just like drawing that parallel to that '08 team that ultimately won the title and is now revered as one of the, I don't know, 10 to 12 best teams of all time. So I don't really care about that. I just look at head-to-head matchups. Dallas is healthy; they're full strength. Hopefully, knock on wood, that remains the case. But as you know, Aaron and Avi, like, Kristaps Porzingis hasn't played in now 35 days. It is longer than Kevin Durant was out for the Warriors in 2019 after the calf strain. Um, so I think it's good for them that they had all this time to kind of just rest them and not and say, hey, we're not going to rush you back. Even if you're ready, even if you're eager to go, you're not playing against the Pacers when we're up 3-0. So I just want a healthy series. I don't want any excuses one way or the other. If Boston loses, so be it. I think more credit should be given to Dallas if that happens, because they beat one of the 4 highest point differentials of all time. So I think sports discourse is not going to go that way. They're going to crap on the Celtics if they lose, because they're such heavy favorites. But I've always just trended the other direction and given the other team props if it happens.
That's really well said, Shane. What do you have to add to that, Avi? What do you think about that?
I mean, I completely agree with that sentiment. I mean, I think I understand why that discourse is happening, because yes, if you're a fan of a team in the Western Conference and if you're the Timberwolves, for example, and you had to face the Nuggets first and then you had to face the Mavs, of course you look fondly at the other side of the bracket and think, man, I wish I was there. I understand where it's coming from, but at the same time, as you said, I mean, this Celtics team over the last 3 seasons has a total number, I believe, in the regular season of 172 wins, which is 14 more than any other team. Like, they've just been a dominant regular season team now for 3 seasons. It started when they made some of those trades away. They traded away Schroeder 2 seasons ago. And from that point forward, as soon as the offense became centered around Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and whichever point guard they would have at the time, first it was Smart, now it's kind of the Holiday Derek White mix. They've just been a dominant force that's been kind of unstoppable. So it's very difficult, I think, to use that as a crutch to act like Boston doesn't deserve to be here because they've put in all the work. It's not their fault that the Bucks decided to implode and hire Doc Rivers and Adrian Griffin and whatever they were doing. It's not their fault that Tibbs decided to play players in Game 82 and eventually his players wore down and got hurt. Like, none of those are their fault. All they've done is take care of business. And even if in some of the games you don't feel that confident watching them, I still have some reservations sometimes about them in crunch time. In the playoffs so far, in 20 minutes of playoff time, of playoff crunch time, they've outscored opponents by 18 points. So, I mean, they've kind of done what they're supposed to do. They've took care of business against these somewhat injured teams. I mean, Jimmy Butler didn't play at all the first round series, but we've covered that already. But when you're faced with those lack of obstacles, what I want to see is a well-rested team and a team who, even without Porzingis, knows we have more firepower than anyone in this conference, and we can finish off every series in 4 or 5 games. And that's what they've done so far. So I don't know. I don't feel like it should be held against them. Now, if it was a situation where, they were playing against the Pacers without Halliburton for the last 3-4 games, and they let it stretch all the way to 7, now I'm looking at you a little bit more with the side eye. But, I mean, you finish it off with a sweep. What more do they want?
Yeah, and I always think it's a silly talking point. Like, oh, you only beat Team X that was injured by 8 points, and a lot of that was crunch time, or you had to squeak it out in the end. To me, point differential is that's disrespectful to the game, to the NBA, because like these teams are good. Like I know Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, like this is a superstar team. This is a dominant roster, top 6 roster, but like Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith, like these aren't scrubs. Like these are really, really, really good players that shined. I mean, and then obviously you look at Caleb Martin last year, right, Aaron? Like him shooting like Klay Thompson or better than Klay Thompson for I don't know 2 weeks of basketball.
That was insane.
It doesn't matter what his name is. It's the production. Right. So like the production, like that's okay that the Celtics lost that series. I mean, honestly, to me, that is I think there's 2 series that I'm going to take that back. I think there's 1 series that Boston has lost during this Tatum Brown era that they should have won, and it's that one. You can argue about the 2022 finals. I don't really know where I land on that because Steph Curry was the best player in the playoffs by a pretty sizable margin, in my opinion, and he won the Finals MVP with a dominant run. I picked Golden State in 6 heading into that. I know for a fact. So I didn't think Boston was winning that. And if you can point to another year, maybe 2020 in the bubble against Miami, right? But I really think this is last year. So people have at that in their mind that the Celtics have just choked for the last 7 years. Really just the last 12 months. just
right.
Last year, that was it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot to be said about this Celtics team, and we can nitpick, but that's the thing. Like, if you find faults with this team, you really have to dig deep, and you have to be intentional about trying to find faults. But overall, 95% what you're going to see with this team is really positive. And I was looking through an article today, NBA.com, that had some really good numbers here, some stats. One of these stats stuck out to me and just kind of demonstrates the dominance of the Celtics team. The Celtics have outscored their opponents by almost 10 points per game from 3-point range, 4 points in the restricted area, and 6 points per game on free throws. So those are all the best differentials in the playoffs. So you look at this team like, hey, they can do it from outside, from inside, wherever. 3-point range, they dominate that area. You look at the attempts, you look at the accuracy, that's where they operate. That's what they do. The Celtics are number 1 in 3-pointers attempted in the playoffs per game. So that's about 39.8 per game. And then you go and you look at their the accuracy is about the same. But just overall, like, this team is just so dominant, so well-rounded. It's not just that. It's not just the shooting, it's the defense. Like, you look at their personnel, and when Porzingis comes back, that's going to allow this team to be the best version of themselves. This is how they got to be 64 wins. And Shane, like you said, when you include playoffs, you're looking at 76 wins. I mean, this doesn't happen by accident. You introduce this lineup that can play 5 out. You have multiple great defenders, and this is it right here. I think they have all the pieces necessary to get past the Mavericks and to win that NBA championship. Another interesting stat I found in regards to defense is the free throws. And Dallas, they're no stranger at getting to the hoop and getting free throws, especially with Luka on the floor. Boston's opponents, they've attempted only 14.5 free throws per 100 shots, and that's the lowest opponent free throw rate in NBA playoff history. So you look at what they can do from there. I think a big reason for that is just having all those capable defenders, and once they have Porzingis back in the fold, like that's just going to be even better. So I think by all accounts, this team should be favored, and I think this is their shot. This is their primary opportunity to get this done.
Mean to tell me that Boston doesn't have a player like Karl Towns that will just needlessly foul 5 times in a quarter?
Man, dude, I just get annoyed just hearing that name. Picking up freaking 5 fouls and 2.5 quarters in one of those games against the Wolves, that drove me insane. And I think Avi feels the same way.
I picked Wolves in 6 in that series, and it just looks so stupid because
I did too.
Me too.
We all did.
And really, I think this playoffs has been a lesson for me. And it shouldn't even been this playoffs. It should have been last year's Miami team. It should have been every year ever, really. Like half court execution, man. Like the ability to get hot at the right time, and then having the shooting. I mean, obviously, Miami's shooting last year wasn't that hot, wasn't that great in the regular season until they turned it on in the playoffs. But like you surround Luka and Kyrie with better shooting options, and then obviously versatile defenders. I just always think it's silly when people say defense wins championships. I don't know if that's a hot take to say it's crazy. Offense to me is now what wins the title, and you surround Luka with these guys, and then Boston having the best offense of all time statistically. I think that's what we're seeing. And I understand like Dallas remade itself with their defensive additions. PJ Washington's been pretty good on that end. They're more switchable. They're more versatile now than they were just a few months ago. So I understand defense still matters, but man, when you're talking about the 3-point volume, that's music to my ears because I believe both Dallas and Boston were number 2 and number 1 in 3-point proportion, so frequency in the regular season. I believe they were 1-2. So, hey, man, I've always said shoot 45 threes a game minimum.
No, I think you're right on the point with that, Shane, and it's perfect segue. I was just looking at the playoff 3-pointers attempted per game because I just mentioned the Celtics at just about 40, and the Mavericks are number 5 in just about 34 3-pointers per game. So I mean they can fight with Boston on that end pretty well with having Kyrie, having Luka, having guys that can get a quality pull-up 3 at any time, and then you combine the awesome 3-point production you're getting from the role players like Darius Jones Jr. transforming into a knockdown 3-point shooter. I didn't see that coming. I've been watching Darius Jones Jr. ever since his days in Miami, and he was nothing like he is today. I feel like from the corners, he's almost automatic at this point. PJ Washington, he's like the new PJ Tucker sometimes. Like he's automatic from the corners. And then you add in guys like Josh Green can hit, these pretty consistently. And like, hey, you have a great recipe for high octane offense. So, I hear what you're saying, Shane. Like this offense is very important. And when you combined the perimeter production of those guys, along with the lob threats that they acquired with Gafford and Lively being that incredible as guys going to the rim, like that's been huge for them. It's unlocked one of the best parts of Luka's game, which is that court vision. So in this series, it's going to reign true once again. And I'm really interested to see how those role players produce. We've seen them just step up to the plate all 3 series so far in the West. So now that they're stepping up against, the best opponents so far in Boston, I'm really interested to see if that continues. During the March meeting, I mean, man, like they just didn't have it in them. But I think that's gonna change. It's gonna be a different story in this game, and they're being relied on heavily, like going through these playoffs. In the regular season, Luka and Kyrie, their usage was pretty high, but once you get into the playoffs, Luka's only 4th in usage and Kyrie is 15th in usage. Kyrie's only at about 23.5%. So that tells me that, hey, they're leaning a lot more on PJ and Derek Jones and Gafford and those guys to really make an impact. Kleba too. Now that Kleba's back, that's another option for him. So I'm going to be looking at those guys very closely. And let's see if they can produce on the road. We know what they can do at home and how guys usually do on the road or at home. But the road is going to be interesting. And both these teams perform well on the road. So I expect there to be some road victories from each team because they've been doing that all season long.
That's another thing I'm curious about, like Avi or Aaron, whoever wants to chime in. Like I'm wondering, because I've been asking a lot of people, why do we think home court's dead? Like why do we think it just doesn't matter as much anymore? Boston is way better as a road team right now. I mean, what did they win in Miami? Like a lot of games in Miami. Like they're 6-0 on the road so far. One of the 4 teams of all time to do that. One of the 5 teams of all time to do that. 4 of them won the title. So honestly, like I'm just curious, like why do we think that home court might just be dying?
The way I think about it, I think some of that is current perception. I think because we're in this era of parity, and especially over the last few years, we've had teams ranked 6th, 8th, 5th, just these random seeds come out of nowhere and make their way into the finals. In Dallas's case, they might even win the championship. So I think that's kind of skewed people's perception of what's really happening here. It's not so much I think that home court doesn't matter anymore. I think what's happening is because of the way the new CBA has kind of been implemented, and even the last few years trailing off from the last CBA, I think all the teams now are much more flawed, and there's less of a gap between the contenders as there used to be. So if you go back, like even let's look at the Warriors' dominance stretch, right? You have the Rockets as the only real challenger for them in the West. The Clippers kind of had a moment, but they were never really at that level. They never gelled quite the same. They didn't have the same sort of variety of shot creators. They were a little bit more dependent on Chris Paul. So it really was those Chris Paul and James Harden Rockets, the Hampton 5 Warriors, and then in the East you kind of have the LeBron, Kyrie, and then afterwards the scraps, but Kevin Love and those guys. Like you have those were kind of the dominant teams. San Antonio had a couple years in there before the older guys started to trail off a little bit. So those were kind of the only real dominant teams you had during that time period. And there was much more of a gap, I think, between the superstars and everybody else. Whereas now I think the class of players that you could qualify as a star or superstar continues to keep growing just because of how great the last couple drafts have been. So the 2018 draft, we get Brunson, we get Jaren Jackson Jr., Trey, Doncic, Shea. Like there's this huge just pile of new superstars that come out of one draft. The year before that, we get Tatum. We have Brown the year before that. Since then, we get John Morant. He doesn't play right now, but whatever. Zion, Anthony Edwards, Tyrese Halliburton, and Tyrese Maxey. Like all of this new generation of players has kind of come in and kind of filled in that kind of lost gap there, the Jabari Parker, Andrew Wiggins draft kind of era where you still have these great bigs that are coming out of there. You have Gobert, Embiid, Karl Anthony Towns when he went number 1 in his draft. So you still have some of these bigs, but there weren't as many excellent primary shot creators coming between that, like, I want to say 2011 and 2017 stretch. So I think now that we're getting more of those coming into the league, there are more teams now that have that one superstar shot creator. And when you surround them with a good supporting cast in a make or miss league where now everyone is caught up and is taking a lot of threes, it feels like almost anything can happen. And sometimes it's just, hey, my team shot 45% from 3 in a game 7 and your shot 33. Too bad.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I do like that. I was actually just reading an article earlier today by John Hollinger on The Athletic about parity today. And he had some really interesting statistics when it comes to seeds and how they fare in each round. Mm-hmm. And he was saying how, like, in the first round, the higher seed it wins almost every time, like we've seen before previously. That hasn't changed. But once you get to the semifinals, we've seen lower seeds win a lot more. So I think that the percentage he threw out there was like 40% of the time. I can't remember what stretch of time that was, but like 40% of the time, the lower seed is winning.
That's huge.
That's still pretty early. So, you have that happening. And then also, Shane, we just talked today about like how the margin of that Mavericks Thunder series was so slim.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a 6-game series, but the games out of 6, I think 4 of the 6 were by 9 points or less. And game 6 was a 1-point win for the Mavericks. That could have easily been a Thunder win and led to a game 7. So I think it kind of reinforces the point, Avi, you're making here, is the fact that these teams that play each other, I mean, you have a team, let's say we're using 2K ratings. The Mavericks were like 92, 93. Thunder are 90, 91. Like the margins are so slim to where it's like, hey, you're going to have a team win some road games because on paper and also in execution, they're so close together that let's just say like, hey, Shea makes 1 or 2 better plays than Luka does. That's a win in Dallas. And then vice versa. If Luka makes a couple more plays, hey, that's the one for Dallas over the Thunder. So with each game, with each series, like we're seeing like very hotly contested games, and it comes down to a couple plays. And when you have that, it introduces some variance. And on a smaller scale, it's game by game. And on a larger scale, you have some of these lower seeds winning. Like, Avi, you're saying like, hey, 5th seed is making it to the finals now. And the 8th seed is making it to the finals, and the 6th seed. And I think we're going to see more of that because the CBA and the superstar argument and these diminishing margins. We don't have the Warriors here anymore or the LeBron Cavaliers. So except for the Celtics, who have been kind of head and shoulders above everybody else, maybe there's another 5 teams after that that are all kind of in the same tier, more or less.
Yeah, I struggled with that this year because I always like around mid-March or something, I always just kind of like to drill down who is in my top tier contenders. Like, obviously, it's the 40 before 20, the 40 wins before 20 losses group. Those are your contenders.
Yeah.
But like, just drill down who's in the tier 1. And I think this year it's embarrassing to say I settled on Boston, Milwaukee, just because I thought Milwaukee healthy had a clear path to the East Finals. And if you're in these finals, you're a contender. I mean, I struggle to say that because the Pacers are there, and it's like, but typically if you're in the Final Four, you're a contender. But I settled on Boston, Milwaukee, OKC, and the Clippers. I thought could hit a different gear, if Kawhi was there, and they all flamed out except Boston. So it's parity is real. It arrived a lot quicker than I thought it was going to, and I remember a few years ago we were thinking, it's nothing for 5 teams to think they can win the title heading into the season. That was a big deal, like because as Avi said, like it was Golden State and Houston. Anyone else, they're not winning the title. But now you can really tuck yourself into 10 to 11 teams like being in the finals, and that's fun. Like it's not realistic because only 2 make it there, but it's fun to think about.
No, for sure. I mean, we can have this discussion about parity, I think, for hours. Like, it's so interesting. But to kind of bring things back into focus here, talking about the finals specifically, I think it's going to be kind of more of the same. Like, both of these teams are really going to need to just be sharp because there's going to be clutch games, and we're really going to see, like, okay, who's going to make the better clutch play here? It's really going to come down to, like, very, very slim margins, very specific plays, and it's going to be razor thin margins here. I think just that's kind of like the theme of this series. But more specifically, I think something I want to see from Boston. So looking at their side of things, the way they play, there are times during the game, and Shane, you've watched them a lot. I'm sure you've seen this, and Avi, probably you as well. But in the middle of the game, hey, you'll see the ball moving. You'll see the driving kicks. You'll see the extra pass. You'll see the swings. They look great. They look very cohesive. There are other times during the game, especially when it gets kind of down to crunch time, and I'm not going to pick on them specifically because most teams do this, but you see a lot more of the isolation game. They're hunting mismatches. They want to get a switch. So like when a smaller player on Tatum or Brown, and they want to exploit that. Like how much do they fall in love with that this series with the defenders that Dallas has? Like, okay, maybe they pick on Kyrie a little bit and see what they can do there. Derek Jones Jr., maybe him a little bit. He's not the biggest guy. Like he's long, he's athletic, but if Jaylen Brown's on him, I think he likes his chances in that matchup. We can definitely see how that's going to go. And then something else I'm also going to key in on is how Dallas is going to defend this 5-out lineup. Because I assume Porzingis is going to be back in this series. So if he is, hey, 5 out. That's something a little bit different than Dallas has faced in the playoffs, especially looking back from the conference finals. Rudy Gobert was stationed in the paint. He's not stretching the floor. Yeah, Naz Reid and Cat did that for sure. But for Gafford and Lively, it's going to be a different look. Like, hey, there's going to be a lot of pick and pops. Porzingis is going to be way out at 30 feet, 28 feet. So, if he's doing that consistently, like how do they deal with that? So those are just a couple of key points for each team I'm looking for. The frequency of isolations for Boston, how Dallas deals with the incredible spacing that the Celtics bring to the table, specifically with the big guys. Something I'm looking at specifically in the matchups.
The more I was watching this, and especially the more I went back and watched the game on March 1st, they played where the Celtics completely blew out the Mavericks. I personally feel relatively strongly that I think Derek Jones Jr. is going to be the one to guard Tatum. I can't say that I really love that matchup from the Mavs perspective, but I can see why it would happen. I think they would be trying to tap into the playbook that the Warriors established 2 seasons ago, even though Tatum's a different player now, somewhat different player now, with what they did with Wiggins. Because I think Derek Jones' body type is somewhat similar to Wiggins in terms of being long, lanky, and athletic, and kind of being able to match up decently well against Tatum and when he wants to get into isolation sets. He's a little bit shorter than Wiggins, but he's a little bit stouter, but he's a little bit shorter, and I think that might make somewhat of a difference. I think Tatum can kind of power through him a little bit more than he could through Wiggins. So it'll be interesting to see. I kind of rate that as my number one matchup in terms of what might decide the series. I think if Tatum can have his way with Derek Jones Jr., and then the defense has to keep collapsing, especially with Porzingis out there on the wing, really deep, kind of forcing Lively to be looking at three things at once. That's when I think the Mavericks will start running into problems in terms of rotations. That was the problem, in my opinion, what they had in March 1st. They were playing so much of those Tim Hardaway Jr., Josh Green minutes. And for as much as they tried defensively in terms of making rotations quickly, they were still somewhat slow once the offense generated an advantage and was just passing the ball around. So I think it's going to be really key for Tatum, I think, to be able to aggressively attack that matchup. And then, of course, Jaylen Brown. I mean, I feel like PJ Washington, in my opinion, is a somewhat favorable matchup for him because I don't think PJ can move his feet quite as fast as Jaylen can with the ball. And I don't think PJ can take away Jaylen's right hand as well as you would like, just because I don't think he can kind of cover his bases as well. So I feel like the Wings kind of have a matchup over their particular defenders here in terms of how they might be able to exploit it. If the Mavs start sending help, that's kind of where I start having questions in terms of, okay, if you're sending help at Jaylen Brown, what is he going to do for me as a passer? I still feel somewhat hit or miss about that. And that to me is another key of this series. Like, what kind of Jaylen Brown passing are we going to get? I think I could argue that this has been his best passing season in all of his all-star seasons so far. But I mean, now more than ever, they're really going to need it because I think that Warriors series from a couple years ago kind of exposed some of the limitations their star duo had. Now that they have more help around them offensively, and I think against the matchup defensively that is less poised to take advantage of some of those limitations, now is the time to strike.
Completely agree with that last point about Boston's offensive decision making. I think that's going to decide the series. If Dallas puts two on the ball, if Tatum, if Tatum is exploiting his matchup or Brown's exploiting his matchup and he draws help, and this kind of ties into Aaron's point about their isolation frequency. I have no problem with them hunting or picking on certain players in moments. It's just the fact that they wait so long in the shot clock to do it, and then it's just, dribble, 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 shoot from 25 feet, contested shots. You attack the mismatch early, not because you're looking to really score against Kyrie every time or player X weak link every time, but because you want to get past him or draw help and then kick it out to a wide open Derek White in the corner or wide open draw. Like the point, people always get this conflated. The point of picking on certain matchups, and Ty Lue done this with the Cavs and now the Clippers, it's to draw help, to draw that second defender. And I think Boston is getting better. To your point, Avi, like this is their best year they've ever had of doing that quickly. There's still hiccups, as people will point out, when they lose 2 games to the Hawks in March. Like that just happens. But like,
Oh my God.
I think Jaylen Brown's getting better at it. Still not the best at it. Tatum doesn't get enough credit. Tatum doesn't get for how quickly he gets off the ball, how quickly he trusts them to make that read, to everyone else to keep the ball swinging and moving. And I'll tell you what, people think about Derek White and Drew Holiday as defensive-minded guys or defensive decision maker or difference makers. Where the series will be won or lost is 2 on Tatum, 2 on Brown, ball in Derek White or Drew Holiday's hands. What happens on a 4-on-3 or whatever the case is? Are they going to make open shots? Are they going to continue to drive and kick again to trigger another action, another rotation? That's the big thing to look for. I said today on Twitter, man, like Luka and Kyrie they're going to average 28, 30. That's just what's going to happen.
Nothing you can do.
I'm sorry. What's going to happen. It's going to be, in my mind, a replica of the 2016-17 finals. Like, pick one of those years where LeBron and Kyrie, Luka, Kyrie, like they just go off. But can your offensive system beat this Dallas defense? That to me is what's going to come down to. So good point about Jaylen Brown. Like, they're going to have to make decisions when 2 is on Tatum, and at some point 2 will be on Tatum.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And going back to that March 1st matchup, that is something that they dealt with. It was that that blitz coverage. They definitely utilized that at times, bringing a second defender, and I think they did pretty well with that. Overall, from my perspective, Avi, I want to interested to see what you thought about that, how they dealt with that. But I think they did fairly well, and it was a big reason why they got that win. Is those guys make good decisions. And I agree, Shane. I do think that Tatum is definitely underrated when it comes to his passing chops. It's something he's gotten better at over time. You go and look at his assist percentage over the years in the NBA. I mean, he started off sub 10% assist percentage his first couple of years. Now he's at over 21% assist percentage. So you look at what he's doing with the ball in his hands. He's making better decisions. It's just taking time for him. He's still prone to take some questionable shots. Brown too. It's going to happen. But as long as those good moments outweigh the bad ones, they're more frequent, make an extra pass when necessary, then they're going to have a great shot to win the series. I mean, those jumpers are going to be there all the time. Like, we know they can get those shots, especially in a mismatch situation. Brown especially likes to use that back down, get within 12, 14 feet, hit a little turnaround. That's going to happen. If he has Derek Jones, if he has Kyrie, that's definitely something that's going to happen. And also with those matchups back in that March 1st game, I did notice that for the Mavericks side, they started off Luka on Holiday, Kyrie on Derek White. And then at the time it was Josh Green, but like Avi said, it's got to be Derek Jones Jr. now. So, there's a lot of favorable matchups there. So the opportunities will be there for the Celtics to get some good shots, even with some, pretty solid defenders there. But I think for each side, it's going to be interesting to see how those coverages change over time. Those defensive coverages, I think both teams are going to try a lot. Specifically, I think the Celtics are going to try a lot on Luka. And it's funny because, Shane, we just talked about that Timberwolves series and how they tried so many different coverages on Luka. Nothing worked. And it's probably going to be more of the same. But it's just about, like, can you make him work? Can you give him any kind of stress? That's what they should be focusing on, not necessarily slowing him down, but easier said than done.
To your point, like, I covered the 21 Mavericks Clippers series, and like, we just straight up asked Ty Lue, like, was the game plan to make him work defensively, put him in every action, so he is, all these are all world athletes. They're gonna have energy late in the game, especially when the adrenaline's pumping, but just to make him 10%, 15% more tired at the end of the game. Like, you can't let him just rest on Drew Holiday. And if that's the case, Drew Holiday's setting a ball screen almost every time up the floor.
Yep.
Watching that March 1st matchup as well, I think part of what I noticed as well is I don't think the Mavericks are going to be comfortable necessarily trying to run a zone against the Celtics, which it seemed like to me that they had tried in a stretch there in that March 1st matchup. But basically every time they did that, the Celtics had an easy counter, throw it out to the corner, have Drew Holiday flash into the center, pass the ball to Holiday. Now he basically has a free paint, and he has a good matchup typically because it would be against Doncic. So now you're basically giving Drew a free paint touch and telling him to go work. And Drew's been a primary creator for years, so that was kind of like a very easy method for the Celtics to generate points. So I think there are at least a couple tools that the Mavericks defensively won't be able to have in their bag, which is good because I feel like stopping the Mavericks might just be difficult. Like even in that matchup, the March 1st matchup that I was watching, it seemed like anytime they got into a pick and roll with any of the two guards, Celtics almost always had to send help of some kind. Like it just didn't seem like those guys could get over the screens and actually just get back in front of the man. Doncic probably because he's so big and because of his level of pacing. Kyrie because he's so shifty. So I feel like the Mavericks might just score the way they have been doing. But if this again, it's like we went like you said earlier, Shane, with the good point about the Cavaliers Warriors sort of system. The Cavs are going to score theirs. The Warriors just kind of have to outscore that. It'll kind of be the same thing here.
Yeah, and I don't know how much you all talk about Dallas, but just something as you all were both talking about the March 1st matchup, and how the rotations and the playing time was different versus now. I mean, I've never really done this, but like you gotta give credit to Jason Kidd. Like people wanted him fired like 12 months ago.
He's done the thing.
He is he's way different than other former players that are coaches. Like he adjusts on the fly. Maybe not like as quickly as the Mavericks fan base want him to, but like that's another thing. Does any fan base love their coach except Miami or Denver? Like
Sacramento.
Yeah, yes. Like
yeah.
No fan base, no fan base is sticking up for their guy. It just seems like they want him fired after every loss, and then he's just the greatest thing after every win. So it's weird.
That's how it goes.
Let's be honest, most of the fan bases are kind of spoiled. I mean, I'm saying this as a Warriors fan. Yeah. Like every other game that we don't win, Kerr is basically on the chopping block.
That is the biggest example ever. Just throw away the 4 championships that they've won.
Just
fire the guy
away,
tomorrow.
Man. Like, oh no, he's not doing anything anymore. Assistants are gone. Just everyone's just ready to axe him immediately. So unless you're a coach of a team that has spent like 15 years in the wilderness and you bring them to some sort of relevance, your fans are ready to chop you basically after every loss. So it is what it is. I never understood the Kidd firing thing. I thought he had done a pretty good job. I felt like I guess now it's being talked about more, but I think it's almost miraculous considering where Kyrie's career seemed to be headed for him to get there. All of a sudden, the vibes are immaculate. Like he fits in perfectly, not a complaint. I think defensively, he's even better than he was with Brooklyn. I think that might have been part of the rift too. I feel like they were just kind of throwing him on an island with their switch everything scheme. He has to basically try to guard everybody. That's not his game. He's probably exhausted and getting frustrated. Here, they're protecting him much more. Like I just feel like there's so much more synergy. Kidd seems to be someone who understands Doncic and Kyrie well, which is not something I could say that Carlisle necessarily had that sort of relationship with Doncic, or that Kyrie seemed to really have with Nash or any of his other previous coaches over the last couple stops.
How many point guards are we going to?
Was remarkable. I don't understand why anybody would ever have wanted him fired.
I don't know how many point guards we're going to cycle through for Kyrie at this point, but is Chris Paul going to be the next head coach of Kyrie at some point down? He's had Steve Nash, he's had Jason Kidd. Got CP as a head coaching role soon. So
he's up next. It makes too much sense, especially now.
People were talking about firing Mike Malone before last year too. Like I feel like this just happens every year.
It's a cycle.
It's just some of them I understand.
You're going to hear it. You're going to hear it if Joe Mazzulla loses the finals. You're going to hear some of that.
Of course. Dude, I'm sure.
He's the worst coach ever. He got to the finals, but if he loses the finals, he doesn't have any ability as a coach.
I've been a stan of Joe Mazzulla this year because of just he seems like a psycho. And I really enjoy that. Like
he really does.
Someone said, like, what do you think about Kyrie being the villain? He's like, aren't we all in someone's eyes? Aren't we all the villain in somebody's eyes? It's like it's so good.
I like that. That's well said.
And I feel like coaches are the easiest to scapegoat. Like even now, when Mike Brown was going up for the extension, we get these reports leaking out from the organization being like, hey, they haven't had playoff success. And you just look at the West and you look at, I mean, Sabonis and Fox are great, but like you look at like the top tier names, like Steph Curry didn't even make the playoffs this year. Like the West was loaded this year. Just to point to that as being like, oh, they don't have playoff success. Let's somehow point that at Mike Brown as if it's his fault, as if he's not running an innovative scheme. Like they do this with all these coaches at this point. It's the easiest person for you to get rid of. It feels to me like in a lot of places, the front office and the owner have much more synergy than the coach. So the coach is just the one kind of left out to dry.
And
I don't know, man. It just
it makes no sense to me because we don't think about coaches the way we think about players usually. When you think about a player, they come in, especially if they're a rookie. Okay, they're going to have glimpses of potential, but they're going to have missteps along the way. And they're going to need time to grow and to learn. Same thing for coaches. We forget that. That's why it makes no sense to me when a coach has, especially if he has a rough roster he's working with, and you have a bad year, and it's like, yeah, after like one season, after 1.5 seasons, we're going to get rid of him. Let the dude have a chance to grow. Mazzulla is a prime example. He came in after Udoka, and last year he had his warts, he had his issues, his troubles, rotations, and strategies and things like that. You come into year 2, everything is just that much better. So he comes in, he grows, he learns. Just give him a chance. Just allow some continuity to build with these teams, so we don't have this revolving door of coaches and players are all like, I'm in a different system every year. It hurts their growth. It really does.
And the funny part is about growing as a coach. The best example of this might just be Jason Kidd. I mean, look at where he was when he started being a head coach. He was a head coach with the Nets for a year. I actually went back just for this and something else I was just doing. I wanted to kind of, for some reason, I just kind of wanted to watch some Middleton. I was just watching some of the Bucks stuff, so I wanted to go watch Middleton back in the day. So I was just going back and watching some of the Bucks from like that 2015, 2016, like early kid stretch. The defense they were running was insane. Like I remember at the time it was something they were talking about. Yeah, the aggressive trapping and stuff they were doing, it was ridiculous. But you just see, and now look at the defense the Mavs won. Like Kidd has grown so much over time, and he's done such a good job of kind of catering it to his players. I don't think enough is being said about what a great job he's done in terms of developing Lively. And that's been since the very start of the season. It's like the first game Lively came in, Doncic in the postgame is talking about this might be the best performance I've ever seen from a rookie on that I've played against or on my team in their first game. Like that was his debut. And game one, he's already like a defensive fulcrum.
Yep.
And yet near the trade deadline, when the Mavs are around like 8th, I think they were 27 and 23. It was something like that. It was
looking right about 500.
Yeah, and people were just all talking about, there was some in the national media and then some, I think, locally as well, fans and stuff, just ready to deport Kidd as if it's like all his fault. Man, I don't know, man. It's infuriating sometimes.
I fully thought that my current town Suns were gonna finish ahead of Dallas. That backfired.
That's how it goes these days, guys. Like we're gonna have predictions that backfire because we have lower seeds winning now. It's almost it has this March Madness type of feel. So it's just how it goes these days, honestly. But yeah, just the series as a whole is so fascinating because you have all these strategies you've talked about, defensive coverages and the offensive firepower and rotations. But honestly, just looking at the players involved here specifically, we talked about Kyrie. We know what Luka has coming up here and his resume grows, Tatum and Brown. Here's a name we haven't even talked about yet. When it comes to the rotation changes, Jaden Hardy for Dallas in his growth. Go back to that game. He played garbage time, that first matchup. That was it. And halfway through the playoffs, he was garbage time. And then all of a sudden, I think, was it the last series? All of a sudden, he starts playing like 15 minutes and 18 minutes, like out of nowhere. Like, Kidd is like, hey, and this is another point for Kidd. He just throws in Jaden Hardy, second-year player, and he's like, hey, show me what you got. THJ's not getting it done. He's out here, shooting blanks. So let me go ahead and throw in Hardy and see what he's got. And he comes in and drops 7 points in 10 minutes or something. I'm like, okay, like the dude's show me something here. Like he's making the lineup adjustments as needed. Now that Kleba's back, he has another option there, but he jettisoned Exum. Exum played a lot in that other matchup as well. His minutes are slashed. Tim Hardaway Jr., his minutes are slashed. And then all of a sudden you have Hardy in here playing some great minutes for him. Just these changes that not just in the regular season, but like on the fly throughout the playoffs have been really cool to see. So I'm just really happy for Hardy. And it looked like he was going to be the odd man out. And as soon as possible, he was going to be on the trade block and he was going to be off to his next team. But like he's found a role here. And it's just another point for the depth and just the waves of solid contributors that Dallas is working with now. So, I mean, honestly, if you go to once you get past 7, like I think Dallas has a more well-rounded roster when you're going deep into the bench. Of course, Boston's 5 or 6 is like unmatched. Like they're just on another level. But man, like Kidd has so many options. And that's why Boston's favored, but When you have that many different options you can toggle through for more spacing, lob threats, defenders, ball handlers, creators, there's a lot to work with there. So that's why I think that, this series at minimum is 6 games, just because there's going to be a couple games there to where, like, let's say Tatum is having an off game. Tatum's shooting numbers haven't been great in these playoffs. Like, you look at his 3-point percentage, and he's only 20 for 60 on pull-up 2-pointers. I don't know if you guys knew that, but his pull-ups that are traditionally been like a staple of his game haven't been falling. So if that happens, and the Mavs get the waves coming in, like, there could be a game or two to where, like, they swing that game. Just the bench coming in and making a difference. So
yeah, where Boston has really excelled is like in the games that Tatum shoots like crap, it's Jalen that has a 40-pointer.
Yeah,
so
someone always steps up. They just have so much firepower in what was ultimately kind of a broken conference. It's just, but I don't know if they'll be able to afford that this time.
No, that's the difference. That's the difference. You're not playing. And Shane, you made a great point earlier. Like, those teams they played, even banged up, were solid. But fully healthy Dallas is not Indiana. It's not Miami. Like, this is a different beast. So if you take your foot off the gas, and let's say you have some of those turnover issues, decision-making issues we talked about, that's when you're really in trouble. I mean, this team is not going to be in transition all the time. They're more methodical, but regardless of the coverage, like, they can get great looks, and that's really going to put you in a hole if you're not careful.
And the Mavs have actually gotten better this year, I think. Quick, I just want to make this point here based off what you're saying. The Mavs are more methodical in the half court, but I think especially because they added this season Gafford, Lively, PJ Washington, and then Kyrie. I mean, this is really the first full season they've had with them. I think Luka's actually gotten much better about pushing the pace. There's a lot more like hit-ahead passes that he's added to his game than he used to do. There was a couple seasons before. I think it's also partially because he's been in shape this year. Like, I think this is the best he's looked physically in terms of just not looking worn down and slow towards the second half of games. I think it's a new element to his game that we hadn't seen in years past, where it would sometimes feel like, okay, once Doncic has the ball, I know he's going to waste at least 6 seconds getting up the court, and he's probably not going to be passing the ball ahead to someone, either because he doesn't trust them or because they're not exactly the sort of player who prefers that sort of opportunity anyways. But now that he kind of has running mates alongside him, I think if the Celtics don't get back, which I don't think is a problem because they're great typically at transition defense, but if they start ball watching a little bit, I think Doncic is someone who now will take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think the series is really close to the point where if Porzingis wasn't on track to return, I would have probably leaned Dallas. But that's not because of KP's production. It's because of he's going to pull that center away from the basket. That's all Tatum and Jaylen Brown need. So it's all about the presence, not the shooting necessarily in the production wise for Porzingis. But everything looks good. He looks like he's coming back. I mean, I would be shocked if he doesn't play on Thursday. I mean, Thursday is like 3 months from now, it feels like. So, but I think he's playing the whole series.
I do too. When we're talking about the impact of Porzingis, it goes beyond, like you said, Shane, it's beyond just like hitting threes. It's the fact he's so willing to shoot. Like, his trigger is so sensitive. Like, I mean, he's not afraid to pull up. Like, he can be almost to where Luka's been pulled up in that Game 5 win against the Timberwolves. Like, he's deep. He catches and shoots. And that's a big part of gravity as well. When you're playing against players that are that willing to shoot and they shoot at least average, like, Porzingis is easily a 36, 37% through shooter from there. Like, that's a huge difference for their offense. Like, Horford's been great, but like, he just turned 38. Guys.
And look at the release, the difference in release time when Horford catches the ball and Porzingis catches the ball. It's astronomical.
Horford has to kind of set, shoot. It's gotten better, but Porzingis is like, he's like 7'3" Curry sometimes with how he pulls up.
I tweeted like a month ago, like, I need Mike Conley or Al Horford to win the championship. That's what I need, and I'm down to one. Down to one. It's
right there. It's right there. That'd be such a great story for him because he's been solid for like a long, long time.
Because that 07 draft, we got KD's got a ring, Jeff Green just got a ring.
That's right.
Mike Conley, Al Horford, neither one of those two.
So. It's so close. I can see
Do
it.
you ever just sit back and think about the Mavs? Just think about the fact that they had Porzingis, they had Brunson, they had Luka. They traded 2 of those guys away, and yet they're here back in the finals. Like
Yeah,
every once
That's
in a
a
while, I just
crazy
think about
overhaul.
that. It's so weird to me.
It really is. Crazy overhaul. Kyrie was with Boston
Yeah,
like 4
exactly.
years ago. That swap is
and they
crazy.
got nothing. They got what they get for him. Kemba Walker, is that what they got for him? I forgot what they got for.
I think he was the highlight of the deal. Yeah,
think
because Kimball was
so.
in the bubble in 20. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think he was a
But
big
no,
part of it.
Hayward. It was Hayward and Kimba swapped. That's what that was,
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's
Okay.
yeah.
to
I
my
Man.
knowledge. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Who cares at this point? But it's crazy. Like I would definitely pick Nuggets to win the West, and the fact that. And really, I think Denver would have beaten Dallas, but you have to get there. You have to get there to have the chance. So
And back to what we were saying before, depth matters. I mean, even
Yeah.
the Celtics, that we know they can go 6 deep. So when Porzingis is out, great, you can just slot Horford in, and they've gotten decent bench production out of players like Pritchard, Hauser every once in a while. Even Cornette was doing fine. And then when you have the Mavs, you really can go, I think, 9 or 10 deep at this point because you've been able to like
Absolutely.
revitalize Jaden Hardy's career when it seemed like it was trending downward because you've done such a great job of finding a limited minute usage for Maxi Kleber and Josh Green because those guys almost act as counters for their offense and defense rather than something you want to primarily major in. So it's just I think the depth ultimately is kind of what's brought these two teams here so far.
Yeah, great point on Kleba. I'm glad you brought him up. This is a defensive, not an offensive, a defensive stat about Kleba, which is interesting.
Mhm.
Also from the NBA.com article, opponents have shot 20 for 68, 29% against Maxi Kleba. Expected field goal percentage is actually 49%. So that's the second biggest differential among 106 players who have defended at least 50 shots in the playoffs.
That's shocking. I did not expect that.
Right? I was pretty surprised when I read that. But I mean,
Good for you, Max.
he's underrated defensively. So I mean, having him back is great on both ends for Dallas. It's another counter, like you said, Avi. Just another guy you can bring out there and like, hey, go space the floor and then be a rim protector for us. Even when we don't have Lively or Gafford, and you already have 2 great rim protectors. Let's just bring out a third one just in case, and you can play him at the 4 and be fine and just another option. So yeah, they're just stacked as far as options go on that end.
Yeah, and Kleba can actually help drag Porzingis out of the paint too, kind of give them a taste of their own medicine. So yeah, he will be extremely useful in this series. I really want to see how they end up managing the rotations here. I actually feel pretty good about Kid adjusting as the series goes on. I'm the one more note I have that I'm wondering about. This probably depends on his health. How many post touches do you think Porzingis is going to get in this series?
I know he got a decent amount in that March 1st game, but now that things
Yeah, that's
are
kind of what got the ball rolling for me.
Yeah. I
probably
think
a lot of them in the first quarter, and then after, just to how players or how coaches do with big men, like let's feed them early on
Get 'em
some
involved.
stuff. Then but probably 2 in the second half. I mean,
I agree. I don't think it's going to be something they sustain because they start kind of going back to the pick and pop and going to other options. So maybe they give it a shot, and it could be decently effective. But with the players that Dallas is now, the personnel, like unless it's a straight up mismatch, I don't know if they're going to be able to exploit that all that much.
I was thinking about that partially because of the trade factor too. When Porzingis got traded, part of the reason Mavs fans were like ready to let him go was just because watching Porzingis operate in the post at that point was just so torturous and so painful. But then over the last like 2-3 years, I think he's become so much more effective at exploiting mismatches when he gets it in the post and kind of using his size and attacking quickly. So I just think it's an added wrinkle, and I think if Porzingis is successful with it early on, they might go to it more often. And I think Mavs fans might be ready to start pulling out their hair, being like, "Where was this? Where? Come on, we traded for this. Why?"
Hey, man, conversely, you're also going to get, because you know how Luka will just scream at everybody and cuss anyone out. Like, if KP misses a few of those bunnies or a few of those against switches, Luka's going to be giving it to him verbally. Like, this is why we traded. This is why we got rid of you.
Traded you.
He's going to be speaking Slovenian again.
It's going to be bad.
Disrespect in this series is going to be crazy. Especially, like, imagine those fans to Kyrie. Because I remember that game when Kyrie's in Boston, man, they were.
Well, do you remember?
Give
You
it.
remember the 22 finals when Draymond was there? Oh,
Mm.
the
Yeah, I
building
remember
was
that.
the building was raucous. Oh yeah,
Oh,
like
yeah. Oh, yeah.
F-U Draymond to the point
Yeah.
where it was so loud. And then after the Warriors won the title in the locker room, they were chanting that as they were celebrating. F-U Draymond. So
I'm
it's
calling it.
just
I'm going to call it right now. I think Kyrie is going to have one of those games in TD Garden.
Oh my
He's going to
God.
go ballistic. Like
oh,
they're just going to be
no.
raining down all the explicitives and whatever. Kyrie's going to have. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a 40. I'm just going to put on the record. Maybe I'm just totally wrong. I'll put it
No,
on the
you might be
record and say Kyrie will have a 40 in TD Garden. He's built for that.
Well,
He just loves those kind of games.
50 is the new 40, so you should have said 50. But
I probably should say 50. I don't know. I guess I don't have the guts for 50, so I'm just gonna
Yeah,
kill
that's
it
bold.
at 40.
That's bold. Especially considering the stat you brought up earlier about his usage rate throughout the playoffs. If he gets 50, I mean, that's really something.
It's for
Although
sure.
you never know. I mean, again, part of the reason Steph was able to score so much against the Celtics in the back half of that series in the finals was because of the coverage they were playing against Steph was basically predicated upon, yeah, we'll just let you try to win the game for them. I don't think you'll be able to pull it off. So you never know. Maybe they end up resorting to that sort of coverage here too. It's not exactly like Porzingis and it's not exactly like Porzingis returning off of injury and Al Horford at the age of 38 are particularly mobile. So it is completely possible that they end up resorting to playing a lot more drop and just being completely dependent on like, okay, we're just going to cover everything. We might not even offer that much help. Kyrie, if you want to attack the drop every time, go for it. It's possible. It's very unlikely, but it is within the realm of possibility that he could get that 40 or 50.
He's going to take it personally. That's my big reason why. That coverage as well, I think, will play a part. But, Kyrie steps up for we've seen it. We've seen him on the final stage before, so he can definitely step up when needed. So, all right. So, guys, any other final thoughts here on this series before we call it quits?
It's always funny. Like there's going to be a million more thoughts that come to mind after game one, after we see what's going down on the court. But whenever you have two teams, one Dallas that remade itself after the deadline, it's kind of just hard to know what's coming. So,
hear that.
I hope Grant Williams and Marcus Smart are sitting together somewhere having a watch party for this series and like calming each other down, because I feel like the series is going to get physical and chippy really quickly. And just knowing them, I feel like they're just going to be like just aching to be participating in the tussle, and they won't be able to.
Oh, Grant Williams, man, you got to feel for him.
Dude, I haven't thought about Marcus Smart in about 6 months. So
Same.
you just brought it back to my memory. I haven't thought about it in a while.
Same. Definitely brought back some memories there.
Because I got to be honest, wasn't watching a lot of Memphis Grizzlies basketball this year, guys. But
neither was I, and he didn't play that much, so that's another reason why. But guys, this has been a great conversation. Thanks to you both for jumping on. Shane, always great to link up with you. After the in-season tournament was our last meeting here, so you're about due for another appearance on the pod. So
Lakers are the NBA champions. Last time we talked.
That's true. That's true. They just finished just beating the Pelicans into oblivion. So a lot has changed since then, no doubt.
I appreciate having me on, man. Anytime if we want to do something. I mean, this series, if it goes the distance, could be 23 or 18 days long. So we'll have plenty of time if you want to catch up.
Yeah. Oh, that just reminded me of something. I really hate that there's so much of a gap between all these games. I looked at the calendar and I was like, oh, game 1 is Thursday, game 2 probably Saturday, right? Sunday. I'm like, guys, you don't need 3 more days between 1 and 2. We just had a week off. Throw me a bone.
They're thinking of us. They're thinking of the content. Okay.
I guess so. They want to give us time to promote and get our thoughts from game 1 out there before game 2 starts.
Exactly.
I appreciate that. So, guys, if you're looking for more of our content, you can check out notradeclause.com. Our socials are notradeclause, one word, on Instagram, and notrade_clause on Twitter. You can go check us out there. There'll be a lot more posts coming, more graphics, updates to draft capital, cap sheets as we get through the draft, as we get through free agency, all of that. But before that, we will have more coverage of the finals. So be sure to stay tuned on this podcast, and also check out our YouTube page. We're going to have some videos up there about what we're talking about. So thanks everybody for tuning in and sticking with us. we'll be back real soon for another podcast talking about the finals and the rest of the NBA. So until then, stay tuned and we'll catch you later.